All right, with Hashem's help, we're going to learn Yevamos Daf Lamed Gimel. We left off Daf Lamed Gimel, the Amud Aleph, all the way on top of the Amid, and let's make a quick recap. The Gemara in Daf Lamed Beis Amud Beis brought down three cases. One was Zar B'Shabbos. The second case was Balmum B'Tuma. The third case was Zar Sha'achal Milika, in which Rab Chia and Bar Karpara argue. Rab Chia always holding that the person violated two violations, and Bar Karpara holding that the person only violated one violation. And even though when they were having their discussion, each one quoting and swearing, that's what the Rebbe said, they expressed their opinions based on what we learned yesterday. However, the Gemara is going to now suggest that the underlying argument is Isur Chal al Isur, or Ein Isur Chal al Isur, and it's going to fit like a glove, but we're going to have to work out the technical differences. And we can all chop how this works. Another thing to point out, that here there is no Isur Moisef. The only Isur Chal al Isur here is an Isur Koilu. As we explained yesterday, quoting the words of Rashi, that Rashi says Isur Moisef, an extensive Isur, means whenever the Chaticha itself, that is prohibited because of the first prohibition, because of the second one, that Chaticha itself will become asr on others. So here we might say that since this is becoming asr on others because of the new Isur, it also becomes asr because of the new Isur on the original person. That's called Isur Moisef. Isur Koilul means that whatever was asr doesn't change. But something else happened that made other things become asr on someone. So we say that since other things are becoming asur, it should also make this asur as well because of the new isur. And let's give examples when it comes to these cases. And as we'll see in a moment, let's Zar B'Shabbos, that there is no isur moisef, but there is an isur koilul. Let's talk it out by heart. A Zar is not allowed to be mechalel Shabbos. Period. Whatever he did in the Beis Hamikdash, he was never allowed to do before. The avodah that he's doing, that doesn't become asur on more people, doesn't become more asur on him. However, a zar can do things that are not chilul Shabbos. In the Beis Hamikdash, the zar cannot even do that. It's other isurim that are not breaking Shabbos, a zar cannot do in the Mikdash. If it's considered part of the avodah, so Isur Koilul will mean, since a Zar in the Mikdash cannot do other things, so even something that he anyways was not allowed to do because of Chilul Shabbos, he also cannot do because he's a Zar. That's called an Isur Koilul. So they'll treat it inside, be Isur Koilul.
Order of first one and then another, right?
That's the way it's going to work. The only one on top of the other to find an Isur Koilul is by looking at it that he's asur to break Shabbos. Therefore, there are many things in the Beis Hamikdash he can do regardless. However, there are other things in the Beis Hamikdash that he could do, the other types of works that he could do, which is not Chilul Shabbos, but they are asur because of avoid in the Beis Hamikdash. So let's speak about burning something on the altar. Since burning something on the altar, that was asur. That was asur anyways. He's Chilul Shabbos. It should also be asur because Zar did an avoid in the Beis Hamikdash. If you hold of Isur Koilul. Now, Rab Shimon holds Ein Isur Chal al Isur. The question is, what does Rab Yosi hold? So, be Isur Koilul with Rab Yosi. That Rab Chia Savar, that Rab Yosi holds that when there is an Isur Koilul, you're going to be chayiv tarting. And as we spoke out yesterday, even though when the Gemara was refuting Rabbi Abahu, the Gemara took it for granted that you're at Abahu, you could be right by Moisef, not by Koilul. And Tosfos talked out in Daf Lamed Beis, Amud Beis, top Tosfos on the right, that the proof was from the Eishes Ish and Chamoisa, that if Rabbi Yosi would have held that Isur Koilul, Isur Chal al Isur, then even if she was married already, if then he marries her daughter, Chamoisa should be Chal because it adds Ein Chamoisa. So Tosfos refuted because of this Gemara. The counter to that is that Ein Chamoisa is not Chamoisa, it's not Shem Achad. In other words, according to this, Rabbi Bo had a good answer. Rabbi Bo could have answered contradiction, and that's the answer we'll have here. Rabbi Yosi holds Ein Isur Chal al Isur. However, when there's an Isur Koilul, or when there's an Isur Moisef, Rabbi Yosi holds Isur is Chal al Isur. which is why if Shimon had a relation with Rachel, you chayv shtayim. Not only to bury him in a cemetery with Rishayim, he's taka chayv to chatois. That's the way Rab Chia learned, according to this. However, Bar Kapara Sover,
Rabbo actually hold that? I thought it said
Rabbo was refuted. Rabbo tried to answer the contradiction by saying that Isur Moisav, there is Isur Halal Isur, and not by Isur Koilo. So the problem we had over there is not by Isur Koilo. And being that Rab Shimon in both braises said that Yechayv Achaz, depending which one came first, he also gave the case where there's going to be an Isur Koilo. And L'chayra Rabbi Yossi over there also argues. That was a question we had on him. It was when now we're learning that Rabbi Yossi holds that both by Isur Moisav and by Isur Koilo, Rabbi Yossi holds Isur Halal Isur. So Rabbi Yossi can argue with Rabbi Shimon in both cases. In both cases, no matter who married first.
Does it mean Isser Chalal Isser, or does it mean he holds ain't Isser Chalal Isser, but in the case where there's Moisef or Koilo,
correct?
Then it does.
Exactly. Rabbi Shimon holds across the board ain't Isser Chalal Isser.
Okay.
However, Rabbi Yossi holds ain't Isser Chalal Isser, but when there's Moisef now or Koilo, then Isser is Chalal Isser. That's it. And therefore, Bar Kapara holds L'mechayv Alachada. And now the Gemara has to talk out, where do you have the Isur Koilo? We have to find Zor B'Shabbos. We have to talk it out by Balmum B'Tuma. And we have to talk it out by Zor She'achal Malika, by all three cases. And the Gemara is going to show you that this doesn't work in all three cases. This only works in the first two cases. Oh, let's talk it out. The Isur Koilo. To link Rab Chia Bar Kapara's argument, which is an argument in what Rabbi Yossi holds by Isur Koilo, that Rab Chia holds, that Rabbi Yossi holds, that Isur Chalal Isur by Isur Moisav, that will only work if you can find the Isur Koilel. You have to find the Isur Koilel. So let's read it and see.
If it was Isur Moisav, then you could say that our kapara would hold that you have to bring to, according to Rabbi Yossi?
It's irrelevant here. We're going to see that Bar Kapara holds, that Rabbi Yossi himself holds. We're going to work that out in a second. Okay. Oh my Isur Koilel Ika, asked the Gemara, what's the Isur Koilel? So let's go. What's the first case? The first case was a Zor that did Avodah on Shabbos. So Bishlem Zor, like we said before, a Zor can do Milacha. However, the Zor cannot do Avodah. And Asyala Shabbos, now on top of that comes Shabbos. What did Shabbos add? Like we explained, Shabbos did not add Melacha, but Shabbos added things that are not called Melacha. Migu mitasar b'melacha. I'm sorry, since Melacha, okay, Daniel, let's get the wording like this. A Zor can do Melacha anywhere, not on Shabbos. The Zor cannot do Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. Comes along Shabbos, since Shabbos adds an Isur Melacha in general, so let it also add the Isur Avodah. Even though Avodah was Asur anyway. That's where you have Isur Koilel. And when it comes to the second case, Balmum, the Balmum that did Avodah B'Tuma, Balmum Me'ikara Shari Balchil. A Kohen who's a Balmum cannot do Avodah, but a Kohen who's a Balmum could eat from Karbonis. They actually ate from Karbonis. They gave them work, they worked in the woodshed. We'll learn that in Kachim. And they should feel that they're earning their food, but they participated in the division of the Karbonis. But Asur B'Avodah, that's a Balmum. But if he becomes Tamei, a Kohen who's Tamei cannot eat at all. So you can argue, since he cannot eat, Migu de Mitasar Ba'achila, Mitarsanam B'Avodah. So there's also the Isur Koilel involved. Why Rab Chia, who holds, that Rabbi Yossi holds, that by Isur Koilel, Isur Chalal Isur, why Chayv Shtayim? Because in the case of Balmum B'Tuma, there is an Isur Koilel. However, the question is, Ela Malika, when it comes to the Gzor, Sha'achal Malika, there is no Koilel over there. The only thing you can find is B'Bas Achasi, the Mishkachasla. But B'Isur Koilel, le Mishkachasla. What does B'Bas Achas means? Before Melika is done, no one is allowed to eat that bird. Why not? Because you're Chayv Me'ila. When did it become permissible for Kahanim and not for Azar? When you did the Melika. So the isur of nevela, which happens from Melika, and the isur of zarus, not meila, the isur of zarus also happens by Melika. Which means both of these isurim happened at the same moment. But there's no isur kailo. There's nothing other than this prohibition that is prohibited on the zar who's eating from the Melika. So you cannot explain that Rab Chia is saying, you're chayiv shtayim, because he holds that Rabbi Yossi holds that by isur kailul, isur halal isur, there's no isur kailul. What could you explain?
If there was one and then another one was
Let's
added.
use the examples we just said right now. That we have, the zar is allowed to do malacha,
Right.
but he's not allowed to do avodah. So avodah is asr on him, but malacha is mutter on him. When it comes Shabbos asers all malacha on the zar. It asers malacha. So you can say, since it asers malacha, it also asers avodah that's malacha. Oh, it's the avodah that he did was asr anyway. This thing doesn't become asr on other people. But another isur that's chal in another scenario should be chal here also. Isur koilel, an inclusive isur. Zar is muter b'malacha. He's asr ba'avodah. On Shabbos, he's asr b'malacha. So why not say he's also asr on a malacha? That's avodah. That's not shaykh in the case of Malika. And before Malika happens, no one can eat a bird. Not Kahanim, not Yisraelim. It's Me'ilah. When the Kohen did the act of Malika, now Kahanim are allowed to eat it. Azar is not allowed to eat it. Not because he's Chayiv Me'ilah, because two things. What's the two things? First of all, you are Zar. Second of all, it's Nevela for you. These are two Isurim that come together. Now, right away, the Gemara already gave you the answer. That just like we are learning that Rabbi Yossi could learn, that even though there's a rule that Ein Isur Halal Isur, there's an exception by Koilol or Moisef. There's another exception, Bebas Achaz. And it makes sense. It's why do we say Ein Isur Halal Isur? Because if it's prohibited anyway, why would Hashem tell you it's Asur? He's not talking to you. He already told you that it's Asur. But if both Isurim come together, you don't have a prior Isur preventing the new one to be Chal. They both come together. So that's exactly what the Gemara is going to say now. So the Gemara says that exactly. The argument between Bar Kapara and Rab Chia is regarding Rabbi Yossi's opinion by Isur B'Basachas, and also Valiba de Rabbi Yossi. And Valiba de Rabbi Yossi. That what? Now right away you have to add a second. If Rab Chia is learning, that Rabbi Yossi is learning, that Isur Chalal, Isur Bebas Achaz, how would we apply this? How do we apply this to the Brais on the top of Daf Lamed Beis Amud Aleph, where Shimon had a relation with Reuven's widow Rachel? There, to make Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon's argument regarding Bas Achaz, you have to say that happened to Bas Achaz. So we have to just find the technical place, the way Rashi talks it out, that there was a Bas Achaz. What was the Bas Achaz over there? The Bas Achaz over there could be that there were two sisters, that they appointed one shliach to receive kedushin for them from the two brothers Reuven and Shimon. Reuven and Shimon both appointed one shliach, taking from each one a pruta or more, to give it to both sisters. But if one shliach met the other shliach, so with one act, the shliach is giving the double pruta, the two prutas, to the shliach that's being makabelit for both sisters, and saying that this is for the Reuven, Rachel, Shimon, and Leah. So they're shaykh that they both got married at the same time, and Rabbi Yossi is saying, since Isur and the Isur came together, it's chal, chayv shtayim. Rabbi Shimon holds, only chayv alachas. Everyone asks, Rabbi Shimon clearly stated in the second brisa, depends which one came first. So we have to explain that what is Rabbi Shimon saying, that we're going to talk this out in a moment, that Rabbi Shimon holds that when two things happen together, Tosfos speaks this out in Tosfos Yevamos will be Isur Bas Achas in the third wide line, that Tosfos is going to hold that Eish is Ach is Chamor, that Rabbi Shimon is going to hold when two Yisurim come at the same time. You know which one is Chal? The more Chamor one. And which one is going to be more Chamor? The Eish is Ach. Why is Eish is Ach more Chamor? Because Eish is Ach is something that has no heter after Misa. Achais Ishtoi, when can a man not marry his wife's sister? Only if his wife is alive. So it's a more temporary erva. The erva of Eishes Ach is a more permanent. True, there's also an exception by Yibum, but that's a lot more rare. So therefore,
We're not looking at the punishment to figure out which one's more common.
no, very good. So here we're saying that
The same punishment? Is that why?
not about punishment, it's about which one is a more serious erva, which isur stays longer in most cases. So Rabbi Yehuda is going to say isur chal al isur b'basachas. Rabbi Shimon holds it's not chal b'basachas, but which one is chal? So there were two braises. So the braisa that said eishes ach was chal, that was the braisa in which Rabbi Yossi argued and said chayv shtayim. Rabbi Shimon says eishes ach. Where did Rabbi Shimon say achayis yishtay is chal? In the other braisa there that it was not the basachas. In that second braisa, there was the case that first Shimon got married, nasachai. So now Rachel is also because of achayis isha. Once there's already an isur of achayis isha, an isur chal al isur. So then eishes ach won't be chal. Good. Now coming back here to the Gemara. Now let's go back to these three cases. Rabbi Chia Savar, Rabbi Yossi holds that the Isur bas achaz mechayv tarti. That when two Yisurim come together, you chayv twice. And we're going to have to walk through all these cases to make sure that it's shayich b'bas achaz. Now we just explained how Melika and Zorus come b'bas achaz. But we have to explain where's the b'bas achaz by the Zor b'Shabbos and the Balmum b'Tumah. We'll talk that out in a moment. But anyways, Rabbi Chia holds that Rabbi Yossi holds that Isur Chalal Isur bebasachas. Ubar Kapara holds that Loi Mechayev El Chada, that you only chayiv one. And why? Not Rabbi Yossi, because he holds like Rabbi Shimon. And V'hache, now the Gemara has to talk out my Isur Basachasika. Now the Gemara has to talk out the first two cases. The last case was already explained. So the Gemara says like this: Hache Zor Sheshimish b'Shabbos. How are both the Isur Zorus and the Isur of Shabbos Melacha chal at the same time? It must be speaking about a case, the Isur Shtei Sa'aris b'Shabbos, that he became a bar mitzvah bacher on Shabbos. That's simple. So the same moment that he's chayiv to keep Shabbos, that he's not allowed to do malacha because he is bar mitzvah, the same Isur is he's not allowed to do avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. Ta'havelu hu zaris the Shabbos bahadi adadi. It is only in this case, according to this explanation now, that Rabbi Chia held, that Rebbe told him, based on Rabbi Yossi, that you chayiv shtayim, because it was chal together. And what will be in the other case, Balmum Betuma, the Gemara gives two ways of explaining it. Balmum Nami, either Kigoin the Aisi Shtei Sarais V'itamele. First, before he became an adult, he was already Tamei. V'itamele means he was already Tamei. And now, being that he's not a bar mitzvah bacher, there's no mitzvahs on him yet, b'chlal. When he becomes a bar mitzvah, which right now, he's not allowed to, he's tamei, and he has a mum. All right, he's a person with a blemish, and he's tamei. He has both previously, and the havale balmum v'tuma bahadi adadi, so they are chal together. Or when he became bar mitzvah, he was neither tamei nor balmum. He was a good kohen working in the Beis HaMikdash, and he cut his finger off with a knife that's tamei. So the moment he became tamei because he touched the knife, he became a balmum. Okay, so this answer would work. It would only work if you would say now that Bar Kapara was holding the sheet of Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Yossi is holding the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. Bar Kapara holds Rabbi Shimon that ein isur chalal isur even bebas achas, and Rabbi Yossi holds like Rabbi Chia holds like Rabbi Yossi that the bas achas isur chalal isur. That would work in all the three cases. The problem here is that each one was saying that they heard from Rebbe and they took an oath. To make that work out, we're going to have to fine tune it now. So the Gemara says, Bishlam Rabbi Chia. According to Rabbi Chia, ki asnaya, ki asniye, lididei. When Rabbi Chia was saying that Rebbe told him, Yer chayiv shtayim, what was his understanding? Was aliba de Rabbi Yossi. Was according to Rabbi Yossi. And when Rabbi Chia heard that Bar Kapara is quoting Rebbe, that Rebbe said achaz, it made sense to Rabbi Chia. He's telling Bar Kapara, I know that Rebbe told you one, but you didn't realize that Rebbe was telling you one only according to Rabbi Shimon. That and ki asni bar kapara, and when Rebbe was telling bar kapara that chayv achas was according to Rab Shimon, that holds that even when it's bas achas, only one is chal. The way Tosfos explained which one is chal, the more chamer. Period. So it makes sense if this is the underlying argument. It makes sense how Rab Chia understood the back and forth. Elo bar kapara, but according to bar kapara, Rab Chia Shakuri Kameshakir. He held that Rebbe was telling him, even according to Rabbi Yossi, Yechai Velachas.
Who held that?
Bar Kapara. According to this explanation, how did Bar Kapara explain why was Rab Chia saying why was Rab Chia saying
Rebbe tell Rab Chia
that you're chayiv shtayim? According to who? According to Bar Kapara's version.
Because according to Bar Kapara, so Rab Shimon for sure would be only one.
According to Bar Kapara, even Rabbi Yossi is one. Was everyone thought that their teacher was telling them? So Mela, according to Rab Chia, Bar Kapara could have misunderstood Rebbe when he was speaking about Rab Shimon, but according to Bar Kapara's version, that's right, Rab Shimon. But according to Bar Kapara, that held that even Rabbi Yossi holds one, so Rab Shimon holds one, and for sure Rab Shimon holds one, Rabbi Yossi holds one, Rab Shimon holds one, everyone holds one. B'vas achas. So how did he understand Rab Chia, who was telling him that Rebbe told him Chayv Shtayim?
Right.
Elo, the Gemara has to say like this: that komifleki be'isur b'bas achas ve'aliba de Rab Shimon. It must be that even according to Bar Kapara, everyone held that Rebbe understood that according to Rabbi Yossi, Yechayv Shtayim has to be that way. B'bas achas. I mean, that's the only answer. The question was, what is Rab Shimon's opinion? B'bas achas. So Rab Chia held that Rebbe held that even according to Rab Shimon, b'bas achas, a new twist, Yechayv Shtayim. Rab Shimon doesn't hold of Isur Chalal Isur. True. Rab Shimon doesn't hold Isur Chalal Isur, not by Isur Moisef, nor by Isur Kailo, but by Bas Achas, yeah. According to Bar Kapara, Rabbi Yossi Taka holds that Isur Chalal Isur b'Bas Achas, which is why he understood that Rab Chia was claiming that Rebbe told him Chayv Shtayim. That was Rabbi Yossi. Very good. But according to Rab Shimon, just like Rab Shimon holds that there's no Isur Moisev and there's no Isur Koilol, Rab Shimon holds there's no Isur B'Bas Achas. V'aliba de Rab Shimon. So this almost works out perfectly. There's only one little twist that's difficult. Why did they have to swear? So Bishlem le Rab Chia, why did he have to take an oath to come Shtabi? He says, I swear that the Rebbe told me Chayv Shtayim. Because they were not arguing with Rabbi Yossi. Rab Chia is telling Bar Kapara that Rebbe was holding that even Rab Shimon holds that you're Chayv Shtayim. Now that's a Chiddush. Why is that a Chiddush? Because again, everyone holds from the other Braisa. We see that whenever was one after the other, you only Chayv Achas. So for Rab Shimon, who doesn't hold by Isur Moisef, nor by Isur Kailol, that Isur Chalal Isur, it's a Chiddush to say that Rebbe held, that Rab Shimon held, that you're Chayv Shtayim b'Bas Achas. So since it's a Chiddush, you needed to take an oath to impress it on him. Rab Shimon is changing his normal Shita, which is normally Ein Isur Chalal Isur. But according to Bar Kapara holds that Rebbe was telling him that according to Rab Shimon, even b'Bas Achas, you only Chal one Isur. And like Tosfos says, the more Chamer Dikir Isur. Well, that won't be a Chiddush. What's Bar Kapara's version of Rebbe's version in Rab Shimon makes sense, because Rab Shimon holds Ein Isur Chalal Isur, not by Isur Moisef, not by Isur Koilul, not by Bas Achas. He wouldn't have to swear. So that question is not the end of the world question. Why did he have to take an oath? Why did that?
Say, I'm swearing.
I'm swearing. He could have.
Therefore, what you were talking about
is wrong. He didn't have to swear. Correct. He didn't have. He wouldn't have to swear. He would just tell, no, Rebbe didn't tell me that. It doesn't make sense. Rab Shimon always holds that there's only one Isur being Chal. Ela bar kapara lo melidish tabuya. So for this, the Gemara says it's not a tiyufta. It doesn't fully refute it. It's only a kasha. And we learned this many times that when the Gemara says tiyufta, it means that it was refuted. Kasha means you have a kasha, but it's not the end of the world. Rab Chia swore, he swore. However, now the Gemara is going to refute it. Bishleim bar kapara. Let's halt up. According to bar kapara, ki asnaya Rebbe lididei aliba de Rab Shimon. What are we saying? That Rebbe told bar kapara chayv achas. Who will that be according to, Chevre? That's going to be according to Rab Shimon. Correct? And even according to Bar Kapara, Rebbe was only saying Chayv Achas only according to Rab Shimon, but he knew that even according to Rebbe, by Rabbi Yosi, by Bas Achas, Yechayv Shtayim. And that's why Bar Kapara understood that Ki Asniyei L'Rab Chia Aliba de Rabbi Yosi. In Bar Kapara's mind, it makes sense that his Rebbe told Rab Chia, Chayv Shtayim, he was telling him the Shittas Rabbi Yosi. But El Rab Chia, now let's go back. According to Rab Chia, what did Rebbe hold? Not only according to Rabbi Yosi, Chayv Shtayim, but even according to Rab Shimon, when it is Ze'achar Zeh, Taka according to Rab Shimon, Chayv Achas. But when it's Babas Achas, even Rab Shimon holds, that even Rab Shimon holds, Chayv Shtayim, that he's going out of his chazaka. So Bar Kapara Shakurik Meshakir. So how did Rab Chia understand what Bar Kapara heard? And the Gemara gives a genius answer. You see, what we are saying is, everyone agrees, even Rab Chia, that according to Rab Shimon, B'zeh achar zeh, there's only one. There's only one. The only debate is, what is the shita of Rab Shimon by Bas Achas? According to Rebbe. According to Rab Shimon. So now the Gemara is saying, we were learning the whole time that Zar b'Shabbos, Balmum b'Tumah, Zar sh'achar malika, since the third case is b'Bas Achas, the first two cases is b'Bas Achas, and according to Rab Chia, everyone will hold Yechayv Shtayim, Rabbi Yosi, and even Rab Shimon, Kasha on Bar Kapara, what were you hearing from Rebbe? The Gemara is going to say that when they were learning these dinim from Rebbe, Rebbe was not speaking about all the three cases. Rebbe only spoke about the first two cases. Rebbe spoke about Azar b'Shabbos, Rebbe spoke about Balmum b'Tumah. Both of these cases, like we explained in the beginning of today's shir, could work b'Bas Achas. They can also work b'Zeh achar zeh. First of all, Bar Kapara, when he heard those two cases, he on his own added the Zar Melika, because it's very similar. The Zar that ate Melika. And once he added the third case in the group, then he made the mistake by thinking that since Zar Melika can only be B'Bas Achas, the other two cases are B'Bas Achas. So when Rebbe told him he's Chayiv Ela Achas, he was speaking about the Bas Achas. That's what Rab Chia understood, what Bar Kapara wasn't lying. He just realized Bar Kapara made one mistake. He added, and he made a confusion because of his addition. Really, Rebbe was speaking about to Bar Kapara Rab Shimon, and according to Rab Shimon B'Zeh achar zeh, Rab Shimon doesn't hold that Isur is Chalal Isur, even when there's Koilel, not Chal, only Chayv Achas. Rab Yosi holds your Chayv. Right, according to how we're learning right now. B'Zeh achar zeh, according to Rab Yosi, by Koilel and Moisef, and Bas Achas. But by Bas Achas, Taki, even Rab Shimon holds, it's not Chal. And the mistake was, let's read it inside. When Rebbe was telling Bar Kapara these dinim, he was tarta leptur asniye. He was only teaching him the first two cases, Zar b'Shabbos and Balmum b'Tumah. Turning the page. And the reason why Rebbe told Bar Kapara that according to Rab Shimon, you only chayiv one, was because the Isur Koilel. Asniye, he was telling him the din of Isur Koilel according to Rabbi Shimon that ain't Isur Chalal Isur. And V'chaz Yel Bar Kapara L'Zar Shachar Malika, and Bar Kapara himself realized that there's a third case. And he thought to himself, the Aida the Damila, since the third case of Zar that eats Malika is also a case where there might be one, there might be two. Arva Bahadayu, he mixed them into these two. So all of a sudden it became a three dinim. There are three cases which have the one underlying din. And once he put them together, V'ayin ba, Bar Kapara then began to look into it. And V'loi ashkach, and when it came to the third case can only be bebasachas. There is never a zeh achar zeh by isur koil. It doesn't exist such a thing. And therefore, v'safer bar kapara thought that midah bebasachas, just like the third case, zarba melika can only work by bebasachas. So how nami the other two cases is also bebasachas. And umidahanach leptur, since he had a tradition that Rebbe said on the first two that Rab Shimon holds, you only chayiv one, but he thought because that's the din of bas achas, haninamach leptur. Okay. Now all of this explained the word ubeplukta and daf lamed beis amid beis. According to Rabbi Rava, according to Rabbi Yechanan, they said clearly eni chayiv alachas. Look at the from extreme to extreme. Rav and Rabbi Yechanan said that Rabbi Yossi holds ein isur halal isur even by Moisef. Ein isur halal isur. And the whole when Rabbi Yossi says he's chayv shtayim, it's just to bury him in the cemetery of Rishon. Now we're learning to the other extreme that Rabbi Yossi holds basachas by isur Moisef and isur koilel that isur is halal isur. And the only reason why he said by the mother-in-law and the chamoisa, because there is no moisef, and there is no kaila, and there's no basachas. That's why he says Yechayiv only one. You have to see which one came first. Very good. And that's the machlekes between here, Rab Chia, both Rab Chia and Bar Kapara hold that Rabbi Yossi holds for sure that Yechayiv babasachas, two isurim, even by moisef and even by kaila. Gavaldik.
So that, where do we end up?
That there's a machlekes what Rabbi Yossi holds between Rav and Rabbi Yechanan and between Rabbi Chia and Bar Kapara. It's great. Yes.
How could
Rav and Rabbi Yechanan
argue with Rav Chia and Bar Kapara?
They could. They are. They had a tradition. No, the whole argument is what does Rabbi Yossi hold? They held that Rabbi Yossi holds ein yisur halal yisur. They weren't speaking about the basachas, but they were saying clearly that not by koilel nor by moisef. Ein isur halal isur.
And Rabbi Chia and Bar Kapara
Hold that Rabbi Yossi holds.
they're in agreement on almost everything.
Well, no, of course they're not.
Except for Rabbi Shimon.
No. According to Rabbi Yechanan, even according to Rabbi Yossi, ein isur halal isur, not by.
Between Rabbi Chia and Bar Kapara.
Oh, they both agree what Rabbi Yossi holds. Their only machlekas, according to the end, was what did Rebbe hold? Shitas Rab Shimon only by bebasachas. That's good. They're very good. Yes. Okay. So we have very good. Now Meisvi. Now the Gemara is going to have a question against Bar Kapara, and we're going to shlug a Bar Kapara. Zolzai, what's the Meisvi? It says in a Braisa, mamish this case, right? The first case, the Zor b'Shabbos, that Zor shemish b'Shabbos, a non-kohen. Iran, he did avoid in the Beis Hamikdash on Shabbos. Ubalmum sheshimish betuma. Right, that was the second case. A blemished kohen who not only did avoida, but he did it when he was tummy. It says in the Braisa, yesh kan mishum zarus mishum Shabbos, mishum balmum mishum tuma. Divrei Rabbi Yossi. So far, so good, right? Everyone agrees that Rabbi Yossi holds isur halal isur. Rab Shimon Oimer ein kan ela mishum zarus ubalmum bevad. Over here, Rab Shimon argues and Rab Shimon holds you only chayiv one. Now ask the Gemara ve'ilu milika shaira. The Braisa did not count, left out the third case of milika. Why did the Braisa leave it out? Leman Shaira. Why did the Braisa not count it? If it is according to the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, Hashta Rabbi Yossi v'isur koilim chayiv shtayim. If Rabbi Yossi holds, which he does, that even when there's isur koil, even though it's b'zachas, it's going to be chal, is b'isur b'basachas, for sure it should be chal. So Rabbi Yossi would say by Melika Bizar that you chayiv shtayim. So why did the Braisa not count it? It must be because Rab Shimon wouldn't argue. Elalav Rab Shimon. And Ubi Isur Koilel, only there who the Pata Rab Shimon. Because it's Zeh Achar Zeh, and Rab Shimon doesn't hold of Isur Koilel. Avol Be Isur B'Basachas. From this Braisa we see, what would Rab Shimon hold? Yechayiv Shtayim. What did Bar Kapara say? One. Tiyufta the Bar Kapara to Yufta, and the end of that. Finished. Okay. Now we have to work out, like we mentioned in the beginning, just the technical isur. Zar b'Shabbos, what exactly did he do? We're speaking about a zar who did avodah, and that act of avodah was a chilul Shabbos. So let's work it out. Let's begin the avodah with a carbon. So the Gemara says, Zor sheshemish b'Shabbos, b'mai, what violation happened? I b'shchita, if the Zor did shchita. So the Gemara says, shchita b'Zor kshera. Right, we learned this in Masechtas Yuma together, that you can do shchita, b'kchidish. So we're saying that even though it's on Shabbos, but since a non-kohen can do shchita, no violation happened. And if it is from the receiving of the blood or taking the blood towards the Beis Hamikdash, tiltul ba'almahu, there is no breaking of Shabbos. Mid'oraisa. Now, normally when the Gemara uses the word tiltul, right, we learned together Masechta Shabbos, it's referring to the Isur of Muksa, Isur D'Rabbanan. However, Rashi says that you don't even have an Isur D'Rabbanan. So there's a whole debate amongst the Achronim trying to explain the Rashi. Is moving blood?
They didn't put it on the ground and lift it, they just took it.
Correct. Many people hold that since there is a mitzvah to bring the blood on the Mizbeach, that's how people learn in Rashi, even though he shouldn't have been doing it because he's a Zar, it's not Muksa. And even if it is Muksa, but we're not speaking, we have to find an Isur D'Oraisa.
That's why like toys on Shabbos, so you can move them because...
the kids can move them. Because for the
kids can move it.
You can move. Very good. But if we're going to speak about burning the meat on the altar, he threw, right, the Zar threw the sacrificial meat on top of the Mizbeach. And just to make something very clear, when you put something on fire today, what are you violating? There's two violations. You're burning and you're cooking. Cooking doesn't go into account over here. Because cooking is only called cooking when your kavanah is to cook. Here, the kavanah is to burn it. So even if there's a moment where it's cookable or edible, no one is planning to eat it. It's being offered to Hashem. So the Isur is called Haktarah, burning. So now the Gemara has a great question. Being that this is all in Shitas Rabbi Yosi, the Braisa quoted Rabbi Yosi. Remember we learned Rabbi Nassan Rabbi Yosi in Masechtas Zerevin, in Masechtas Yevamos, regarding why in Parshas Vayakel, why did Hashem say Lo Yisavaro Eish B'chol Mishvei Seichem? Why did Hashem specify one malacha of not burning on Shabbos? So was it L'chalik? And Rabbi Yosi held L'lav Yotza, that the reason why Hashem said don't make a fire on Shabbos is because the Isur of burning is not a prohibition for which a person is going to get skila or kares. You're only violating a lav. So according to Rabbi Yosi, there is no Shabbos violation for burning. Let's read it inside. V'bak Torah and Rabbi Yosi have L'lav Yotza. It's Gavaldik. Unlike, now who cares about that? Because we were explaining the whole time that we have to find out exactly when you speak about Chayiv Shtayim, what type of punishments are we talking about? So l'chayre we were speaking about two punishments, but here, Zor that did the avodah is Chayiv Misa B'dei Shamayim. And the burning on Shabbos is only Malchus. Amar Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, I'll find you a case where they're both equally prohibited.
Well, why is that a problem? Just to clarify, if they're not the same level of stringency, who cares?
Because we're trying to find a practical case where a person, let's say, did it.
There's no chatos.
I'm guessing now, l'cho'eda, if one isur is a lot more chomer than the other, then it should be chal. So there's the isur of burning, which is only a malchus, and then the zor that did it, now he's doing a violation of Misa B'dei Shamayim.
We're trying to bring out, right, with Rabbi Yosi, when we're seeing that there's two, it would be a case if he has to bring two korbanos.
Not two korbanos. We spoke that in the beginning because the zor that did an avodah b'shoigig doesn't bring a carbon because there's no kares. There's only Misa B'dei Shamayim. So we're speaking about someone did it b'mezid. Well, no, Rashi says clearly. We're speaking about a person that did it b'shoigig, and we understand that he's chayv chatos, and that's the kasha. That's what Rashi is saying, that according to Rabbi Yossi, there shouldn't be a chiyuv chatos. And the Gemara is going to say, you'll see in a moment, you're talking not chayv chatos. But one second. Why did we're assuming that the person did this b'shoigig, and he's chayv chatos, and the Gemara is asking, why is there a chiyuv chatos, according to Rabbi Yossi, who holds havar lalav yotzasa? So that we're speaking about a case, we're speaking about Shabbos doesn't mean Shabbos. Shabbos means Yom Kippur.
Wow.
And this we learn in the Masechtas Yuma, that all of the avodah that happened on Yom Kippur has to be done only by the Kohen Gadol. And there we had an argument, what about Shechita? One opinion holds that just like normally Shechita Kshay or Bizarre, that the Kohen Gadol doesn't have to do the Shechita of his parchatas on Yom Kippur. But another opinion held that even that has to be done only by the Kohen Gadol. So there is where you have one act of Shechita that is in violation. It's Shechita, it's a Malecha Shabbos. Even according to Rabbi Yossi, that is a Malecha of which you chayiv kares and skila, and b'shogeg chatos, and it can, and there's zaros. If that's the case, why were the words of the Braisa? Why were the words of Bar Kapara and Abchia that it was a Zor, right, that did the Avodah on Shabbos, Zor b'Shabbos, Afil a Kohen? Hedyet Nami. Even a Kohen Hedyet cannot do the Shechita of the sin bull of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. Says the Gemara, exactly what does Zor mean? Zor doesn't mean a Yisrael. Zor means someone who is foreign to this service. That Shezor Etzloi Ka'amar. For this Avodah, a Zor did it. Maskav lo Rab Ashi Midei Chato is K'tanei Oy Lavi K'tanei Ela Isur B'Yalma K'chashiv. He challenges the whole question exactly, but we were struggling with. This is exactly what Rav Ashi is asking. When Bar Kapara and Abchia were arguing, but you look at the words. Look at the words. The words was, when Abchia began to explain himself, he says, Yesh kan mishum zarus, v'yesh kan mishum Shabbos. Danny, that's exactly what he's saying. In other words, yes, let's say it's Rabbi Yossi, and we're speaking about Haktara. And Aktara is a sin according to Rabbi Yossi for which you don't get kares and you don't get skila. So what? He did it. Are you chayiv achas or you chayiv shtayim? And the idea of chayiv shtayim, to correct what I said before, if you hold the ein isur halal isur, then there's only achas. You have to see what isur came first, right? Shabbos comes first, and then finished. You have to keep Shabbos. So then when it comes to you doing the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash, you don't have the new isur. If we're not speaking about punishments, then if you chayv achas or shtayim, so like we said in the beginning of the sugya, the way we explained originally the whole Rabbi Yossi, the way Rashi explained and other Rishonim explained otherwise, that the Beis Din had the cemetery, and in their cemetery they had different sections, and you don't, just like you're not supposed to bury a righteous person with a wicked person together, even amongst the wicked people there are different levels of wickedness, and someone who violated 2 lavim is a person who's considered more wicked than someone who violated only 1 lav. And they're not buried together. So we simply want to know how many violations happened. That was the argument between Abchia and Bar Kapara. And that ends the sugya. That was fantastic. And now, Baruch Hashem, we have time to continue. So we are up to the Mishnah and Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Beis. Look at this case over here. Crazy cases. Shnayim shekitru shtei nashim. 2 brothers, no, I'm sorry, not 2 brothers, 2 people, 2 men, will begin with everyone being a stranger. 2 men gave Kiddushin, made a Torah engagement to 2 separate engaged women. And while they both entered the chuppah, they accidentally, as the Gemara will explain, hechlifu means they exchanged wives. And the Gemara is going to right away correct that it's not hechalifu, but it's huchlifu. By accident, each one went into the chuppah with the other. That means each one had a relation. Chuppah means each one had a relation with the other person's engaged wife. So there was an accidental sin over here. What sin then they violate? This is a sin that another man's wife. Another man's wife is Isur Skila. I'm sorry, it's Isur Chenek, but Isur Kares. B'shoigeg gechayiv chatos. So everyone has to bring a chatos. Harei elo chayav mishum eishes ish. All the Rishonim ask, 1 second, why does the Mishnah say the words Eishes Ish? We learned from the Chumash, from the Pasuk, from the Torah, that there's a unique din by Naira Hamurasa. A Naira Hamurasa, if a man has a relation with an engaged woman, then the punishment there is skila. The punishment for an Eishes Ish is chenek. It's not the same sin. Why did the Mishnah say the words Eishes Ish? And the Rishonim answer that Einu Chanami. If the Mishnah would have been speaking about a person who did it b'mezid and was forewarned, and here the question is, what capital punishment do they get? Since they were only engaged, they were not married yet, then the punishment would have been skila. But our Mishnah, is like we just explained, is speaking about a case of a shoygeg. By a shoygeg, there are both sins for which there's a chiyuv, kares, b'mezid. They both get chatos. Each one has to bring a chatos, and that's the meaning of the Mishnah.
If someone has a relation with an engaged woman, that's a harsher punishment than with a fully married woman.
Yes. Now, let's start adding lavim, and don't forget, we're going to have to work this out, God willing, tomorrow. Now that we already know that if it is bebasachas, if there is isur koilel, if there is a isur moisef, that there are times that isur is halal isur. So now we're going to find a case where there might be more than one violation. What will be more than one violation? If the two men who got engaged, they were brothers, which means each engaged woman is one's brother's wife, called Eishes Ach. So then each one violated two erves, for which there is kares, for which b'shoigeg you have to bring a chatos. So now each one has to bring two chatos. Now what happens if these two engaged women were sisters? So now we're back to our Rachel, Reuven and Shimon, and Rachel and Leah. And Reuven got engaged to Rachel, and Shimon got engaged to Leah. And by the chuppah, they accidentally, each one was with the other person's wife. So then you have mishum isha ala chaysa. You have a chayis ishtay. And if on top of that each one was a nida, v'im haya nidais, and having a relation with a nida is another chiyuv kares, b'shoigeg chayv chatos. So here you have 4. So how many chatos have to be brought over here? 4 times 4, right? There were 4 people. Each one violated 4 lavim, for which if it would have been done b'mezid, there would be a chiyuv of kares for each one. So you have a total of 16 karbanos. Now, Mishnah continues, if such a mistake happened, God forbid, how it can happen is akasha. We're speaking about in the Hasidic community that men meet their wives once, together with the parents observing, and they didn't know exactly who she is. But you don't know who's the person. Anyways, let's not get into the technical. We'll get to that in a moment. We'll get to that in tomorrow's share. So now, how did I get to 16? After the previous Gemara, it's easy. 4 times 4 is 16. There is an isur of Eishes Ish. There's an isur of Eishes Ach. There's an isur of Achos Ishtay and Nida.
You're saying each one of the 4 people has to bring all 4.
That's right. 4 times 4 is 16. Now that this happened, terrible thing. If the husbands are not Kahanim, if Eishes Ish, if one man's wife accidentally, against her knowledge or will, had a relation with another man, she's mutter to go back to her husband. However, before she goes back to her husband, you have to have a hafrasha, a separation of 3 months to make a hafchana, to make sure that we know the yichus of the children. It's very important to know who fathered which child. Now, if this kala, discovering the mistake, would immediately go back to her correct husband, if she would become pregnant in the beginning of her marriage, there would be a question mark as to, did she get pregnant from the sinful relation? No, forget about the sin part. Is the other man the father? I count the months of pregnancy, so we see in halacha many times that there's a concept of a pregnancy of 9 months, and there's a pregnancy of 7 months. So therefore, if the baby is born, even if they didn't have a 3-month separation, if they only had a 2-month separation, and a baby is born at the end of 7 months from the correct husband, at the end of 9 months from the mistaken sinful relation, there'll be a question as to who is the father of this child. So what we need to do is we have to wait for hukar ubra. We have to wait until, if a woman is pregnant, everyone can know that she's pregnant. That happens after, if it's 3 months or 90 days. We'll get to those details later. And once you have that separation, so at least we won't confuse who the father is. However, adds the Mishnah, what happens if these 2 women who were accidentally exchanged, if they were minors, they were so young that they cannot get pregnant. So if there's no fear of pregnancy, ketanis meaning that they're too young to get pregnant, then right away each wife can go back to her correct husband. However,
the Mishnah just giving us advice now what to do in this case?
It's not advice, it's halachas. The Mishnah taught you the halacha of havchana. We had this for the first time, that you have to wait 3 months. This halacha is relevant today, that if a woman gets divorced, so even though once the man gives his wife a get, it's definite, they're divorced, nevertheless, she is not allowed to marry a new husband. She needs to wait for at least 90 days to pass. Or 91 days to pass. The 3 months has to pass. Because if she'll get married right away, if she'll get pregnant, people won't know. Is she pregnant from the new husband? Is she pregnant from the old husband? So this is the din. However, concludes the Mishnah, V'im hoyu kahanois. The Gemara is going to ask, it's not about her being a kohenes, it's more about the husband being a kohen. It means even if she's a Yisraelis, if the husband is a kohen, see, by a kohen, if a kohen's wife has a relation with another man, even if it was against her will, she can no longer be with her husband. So, or the Girsha Drashal, nifsulu min kahuna. And again, this will be clarified in the Gemara. What does it mean? If they were kahanos, it should, this din should only be dependent on who is the husband. Is the husband a Yisrael or is the husband a kohen? But we'll get to that in the Gemara. But first, the Gemara questions the way the Mishnah was written. The Mishnah writes the words hechelifu. For people who know Lashon Kodesh, hechelifu means they exchanged wives. It's an act of mezit. So hechelifu. Ask the Gemara, midi birishi askinon. Is the Mishnah speaking about wicked people? That they exchanged wives? God forbid. Of course, that's not the meaning of the Mishnah. So the Gemara explains, Visu, and furthermore, Hadatani Rabchia. When Abchia said regarding this din of the Mishnah, Hare kan sheish esrei chatois, that here we have 14 karbanos, as we explained in the Mishnah. When these things are done on purpose, you don't bring a sin offering. A sin offering doesn't bring atonement for a sin that's done on purpose. A carbon chatas is only brought if something happened by accident. Ibe mezid, mi'ika carbon, question mark. Elama, Amarav Yehuda, Tani, you have to read, Huchlefu, that they were exchanged, the way it was an accident. And now the Gemara is going to say, I don't need the girsa of Rab Chia Huchlefu, I'll prove it to you from the Mishnah itself. How are we going to prove from the Mishnah itself that we must be speaking about an accidental exchange? Because since it says in the Sefer Im Hayeketanois that if they were minors, meaning she'einam ru'uyois leiled, if they were too young to have children, to become pregnant, then machzirin oisen miyad, they can right away return to their husbands. Ibemezid, if they did it knowingly, if a woman is unfaithful to her husband knowingly, even if the husband is only a Yisrael, she's asur l'bayil, and she's asur l'baal. She can no longer go back to her husband. Misharia. So the Gemara says that's not a proof. Why not? Holikash. Because if we're speaking about a minor, a girl who is a minor, I mean she's under bas mitzvah, which is why she cannot get pregnant. We learned about this a few daf ago. Right, they're about the 11-year-old, and there was an opinion that says that she might get pregnant, and for sure if she's under 11, she cannot get pregnant. When a person is halachically a minor, even if they do something consensually, it's not called with their consent. The words of our sages are, Pitui ketana oines ninu, that if one seduces a minor girl, and she does something willingly, we don't consider that a willing act as far as she is concerned. We consider that she was raped. It was a forceful act. She wasn't old enough to understand the options, the choices, and she's not choosing, that's why she's not a bas mitzvah. So when it comes to the seif of the Mishnah, the fact that the Mishnah says that if she was a minor, she can go back to her husband, that doesn't prove that we're speaking about an accident, because a minor girl, even if she did it willingly, halachically, it's considered against the will. But the Gemara says, but still, I'll prove to you from the Mishnah itself that we're speaking about an accident, an exchange that happened b'shoigeg, because it says regarding an adult that you separate them for 3 months. Why? Shema mu'ubaresein. Right? We want to have the hafchana to make sure we know who the father is. Halav mu'ubares. But if she's not pregnant, if after 3 months go by and she's not pregnant, then she goes back to her original husband. Now that doesn't work. The and if the Mishnah is speaking about a case where God forbid people did it knowingly, is mi shari? A woman who's unfaithful to her husband is never allowed to be not with the person with whom she had an affair with, nor with her husband. Elulav shmamina huchlafu, like the Tani of Rab Chia, shmamina. And we'll stop over here, and God willing, we'll continue tomorrow.